that's something that we're looking forward to is hearing, but you're exactly right about that. But they educate. So I remember when Chuck used to do the show years ago, people would ask him something, and he says, I don't know, but I'll look into it. And
yeah, that's the responsible answer. Chuck Harder was terrific. Chuck Harder was like an Arthur Godfrey. He had a magic on-air personality, and he could really do a good show. I always enjoyed listening to Chuck. I enjoyed being on the show with Chuck. And he had a distinctive point of view, and he could explain it well.
He was unique. There's no doubt about it. He was one of a kind, and he could connect, and that was a big thing. He could connect with people from all walks of life.
Well, he in a different time, he would have been, a Bill O'Reilly or someone of that nature.
Oh yeah.
I always thought he was more substantive than Rush Limbaugh. He wasn't as ideological.
Sure.
And so he drew a different type. He drew a good audience. I can tell you back in the days of the Reform Party, he literally was reporting on what the Reform Party was doing and people and the issues. You may remember back when NAFTA came out, the government accounting or government printing office only printed 100 copies of the agreement. So Chuck got a copy. In fact, I went over to the printing office in Washington, got a copy, sent it to him. He printed it on like a telephone book. He was literally selling this thing for about the cost and the handling. Tens of thousands of copies of those things sold.
Just to get it out there.
I did a debate.
Yeah.
Oh, he got it out there. And then Chuck and I did hour-long shows on each chapter of the agreement. They had 22 chapters. We did an hour-long show on each chapter. And so I did a debate with Rufus Yerxa at the Kennedy School in the fall of '93 when the agreement was being handled. And so we had all of these professors and students, et cetera. It also turned out that Chuck had a outlet in Cambridge. It was a small station, 1,000-watt station, I think. And it turns out that all of large numbers of people not only followed the show, they had bought the book, and bought the agreement, and had gone along with the studies. So we show up at the Kennedy School, and so Chuck announced I was going to be there. And so all of these people come in, and they had copies, this blue copies. I'm looking at the audience.
Wow.
All through the audience were people with copies of the agreement. And so you had Robert Lawrence, who was moderating, as a professor there, a trade expert, and you had Rupert Yerxa, the number 2 person at the office of the USTR. So each of us made our comments, getting ready to do the debate, and they threw it to the audience. I virtually got no time, because basically the audience was making the points, and they knew the specific details that Lawrence and even Yerxa didn't know. And
remarkable.
Yeah, so I rode back, I took a cab back out to the airport after the debate with Yerxa, and he said, where did all those people with copies of the agreement come from? And I told him the story about Chuck Harder. He said, that was unbelievable. He said, that was the toughest audience I've ever faced.
Knowledge is power, man, when you get that information in. And the Internet, and back then, it was in its infancy, so it didn't have any of this stuff online.
No, it didn't. And so, but I don't know, I think Chuck sold 40,000 copies. I mean, can you imagine any government document or agreement of substance as complex like that selling 40? That
it's unheard of.
Talk radio, and and people who really are interested and want to know the details.
People miss, Chuck. He's retired. He's in a nursing home. He just, he's had a lot of health issues and all that other stuff. But he definitely had a grasp on what was most important, and he took a beating. The Clintons hated him vehemently because he would do stuff that you just mentioned. He would just print it off at cost. He didn't make money off it. he really wanted to educate people.
Well, the Clintons sicked the IRS on him, and they sicked the IRS on me. It cost me $85,000 to go through an audit with lawyers and accountants, and I wound up getting, I don't know, a $3,000 or $4,000 refund. It was just total harassment. Then, and you can find this on the internet. Basically, what happened is they took on 30 critics, 30 conservative critics. Chuck was one. I was one. You had several others that were there.
And there was no Glenn Beck at the time. It was just Chuck and you.
Yeah. And so basically what happened is we wound up with 28 others being audited. We got together, and Mark Levin was one of the guys. Mark was just really starting out aggressively. And so Mark took the lead, and basically he filed a Freedom of Information request at the IRS for all communications on this lawsuit between the White House and the IRS. And, of course, the Clintons stonewalled it. We wound up with a judge, Judge Royce Lambert, federal judge, really a good judge. And he ruled in our favor. The White House and the IRS had to release the information. They refused to do it. In fact, they went to the Federal Court of Appeals. Federal Court of Appeals, a three-judge panel, unanimously ruled in our favor that the White House had to release it. We were convinced that all of us were being audited and harassed because of the White House. The day after, I mean literally the day after the appellate court released that, the IRS canceled the audits, all 30 of us.
No kidding.
No, I mean, you can find the story on the net. Mark Levin and Chuck Carter.
I didn't know Mark was involved with that, so this is brand new to me here.
Well, Mark was the lead guy. He had been assistant to Ed Meads at the Justice Department, really knew his way around the court system, and basically Mark just said, I'm convinced that this came out of the White House.
Dirty.
And he said, we find that letter and it's over. Well, the very fact that the IRS dropped the suit after they had to were forced to release the letters, that was the end of it. That just went away.
Yeah, it's I remind people, this is a reboot of, Chuck Carter's program that I've been on for 2 years, and but Chuck was on 350 stations. So we're on a handful of stations now, growing, and it's rebuilding. But he was on 350, 60 cable outlets. The White House destroyed him. They destroyed you guys overnight, and, I mean, you and Chuck tag teamed.
It was, we were a threat. We were an absolute threat.
Big time.
And, of course, Chuck was a strong supporter of Perot and I in the 96 campaign. And it just drove the White House nuts. It just drove them absolutely.
Pat, I got to ask you a question. And if you would have won, you and Ross Perot, do you think the country would be a much better place now? Would we have the threats and the garbage we have going on with these with GATT and NAFTA?
Not at all.
Would you have reversed GATT and NAFTA? Would you have done away with it?
We would have had a real trade agreement. In the back of the book, the NAFTA book that Perot and I wrote, we laid out basically some things. We would have said we would not have exploited Mexico as has been done under NAFTA. We warned that allowing Archer Daniels Midland and a handful of other producers and commodity brokers to dump corn into Mexico for less than the market price in Mexico, which we did, would wipe out, we predicted about 10 million workers, farm workers in Mexico, which is exactly what happened.
My goodness.
We wiped out the corn industry. It effectively threw 10 million people off of the farms, and large numbers of them came to the U.S. That was the surge.
I see.
The second thing, we allowed foreign companies have access to the U.S. through Mexico, where they've exploited the workers. We laid out a basic program that we called a movable tariff. We would have said we would take the average American wage in an industry, and we would say, okay, we'll take 80% of that, and the difference between what the average wage is in Mexico and that 80% we'll put as a tariff. As Mexico increases its wages, improves a lot of its people, really creates a market for goods in Mexico,
sure,
then that tariff goes down. So that was one of the things.
Would have been good for Mexico, good for America.
It would have been good for all of us. I mean, it's the way that you stop illegally in Mexico is to make it very attractive for people to return to Mexico and to live in Mexico, and that depends on wages and a government that will enforce its own laws, that where you don't have 32 families literally exploiting the country, which is exactly what exists now. So we would have done that. We would have had more trade, better trade, and the Mexican people would have profited. What happened is Clinton in 2000 cut the deal with China, in effect opened the U.S. market to China, and when they did that, basically you had companies move out of Mexico, go to China, produce, send the goods back. Bill Clinton built the Chinese economy with his 2000 Ascension deal.
Oh, yeah.
That would have never have happened. That never would have happened. And by this point, at the point that we ran the national debt, I think it was around $4 trillion. The national debt would have been paid off.
Oh, yeah, easy.
Bill Clinton was Bill Clinton was well on the way to paying it off, and you wound up with Bush. Didn't worry about that and just doubled it, and then you wound up with the collapse of the economy in 2008.
That was it.
And so you wound up, doubling it again with Obama. So that wouldn't have been, and we would have had no debt. Remember when Jimmy Carter left office, the national debt of the United States was $978 billion. Wasn't even $1 trillion.
My goodness.
We'd gone for 200 years, and we had less than $1 trillion of national debt. And basically, you've had really Republicans, Reagan, the Bushes, and Obama doing a cleanup of the recession, haven't cared about the debt. Now, you've had some of their advocates, they call it feeding the beast strategy. In other words, use up all the credit so there's no money to do things like Social Security or Medicare, Medicaid, infrastructure, etc. None of that would have happened. The other thing is there would never, and I mean never, have been an invasion or us getting into war in the Middle East as we've done.
Well, what did Paul Harvey say? The Middle East is quicksand. I got to ask you, I'm going to play a clip right here. This is Donald Trump, Buy America, Hire America. See if this is music to your ears.
Buy and Hire American order I'm about to sign will help protect workers and students like those of you in the audience today. This historic action declares that the policy of our government is to aggressively promote and use American-made goods and to ensure that American labor is hired to do the job. It's America first. You better believe it.
What do you say to that?
I don't believe him. I do not believe him. All of the goods that he sells are made in China and foreign countries.
All right, let me stop you right there because I know this and I've heard this. So my thought process, and I know you're an economist, so I'm going to respect your answer, trust me. Because of GATT and NAFTA, And because of this free trade, the so-called free trade, and we know that